Hello, film fans. Welcome to All the Film Things. I'm your host, Elizabeth. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review or a rating. Also follow All the Film Things on Instagram for updates and more film things. Today, I'm talking with James Miller. James Miller is a professor and author based in New York. At the New School for Social Research in New York City, he is a professor of liberal studies and the faculty director of creative publishing and critical journalism. In 1976, he earned a PhD in the history of ideas from Brandeis University. James is the original editor of the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll and wrote music reviews for Rolling Stone in the 70s. For much of the 80s, he reviewed books and was a pop music critic for Newsweek. Among James's many accomplishments, he has been a Guggenheim Fellow, and his work has continued to be featured in magazines, peer-reviewed academic journals, and newspapers over the span of his decades-long career. James has written several books, acclaimed by critics and peers, on various subject matters from politics, like his book, Can Democracy Work? A Short History of a Radical Idea from Ancient Athens to Our World, to philosophy, and examined lives from Socrates to Nietzsche, to music in his book, Flowers in the Dustbin, The Rise of Rock and Roll, which won the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for the Best Music-Centered Book written in 1999. James's latest book, and the first he's written that is focused on film, is titled The Passion of Pedro Almodovar, a self-portrait in 7 films, and will be published through Columbia University Press on April 29th. We will be talking more about this book soon, but if you're listening before April 29th, pre-order his book wherever books are sold. Jim, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm so happy to have you on. I've been so excited for this. I really, really loved your book, and I can't wait to discuss Almodovar with you. But I first want to ask you about your own interests in film, and in the book you talk about how going to the cinema, going to see film was a big part of Almodovar's passion, and it was his way of escapism from the troubles in his life. So what is a film that greatly impacted you, maybe when you were younger, or just a film that really has stuck with you for many years?
Well, I belong to the same generation as Pedro Almodovar, and I was exposed to art cinema, foreign films on gloomy topics about whether God exists or not. From the time I was in high school, I had, of course, watched television and seen movies before I became aware of Antonioni or Bergman or Fellini. But cinema became to me something of an obsession in high school and then into college and then as a graduate student. I was in Boston, and there are plenty of places in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where you can see classic cinema. Harvard has a very active film program. They had rare prints of Hitchcock films that at that point in the 70s had been withdrawn from circulation, like A Vertigo and Rear Window. Like many people of my generation, I read Andrew Sarris's Classic American Cinema book and tried to see as many of the films that he listed as important as I could, often watching on cathode ray television sets, scanning for films from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that I hadn't seen at the time. So there was a period of time, and it was a formative period in my life, when I watched an awful lot of movies. And like other older critics who were writing at the time, Susan Sontag, for example, I was convinced that cinema was a distinctively 20th century art form. So I read with some avidity the books that came out in the 60s on various directors. And this was in a period before film studies was an established niche in the academy. And there were actually rather few books that were coming out that were serious critical treatments of filmmakers. So it was a big part of my intellectual life in the 60s and 70s. And once I had, raised children and stopped just looking at cartoons all the time, I was able to come back in the age of DVDs and Blu-rays and renew my interest in classic cinema, which had been sort of an avocation on the side.
Wow, you named four of the absolute greats: Hitchcock, Bergman, Fellini. Um, when you said that Vertigo was out of circulation for about 30 years, so you got to see it when no one was able to see it.
Well, it was released and I was 11 years old, so I didn't see it at the time. It did appear on TV, and I sort of remember seeing it in the early 60s. But when it went out of circulation, somehow Harvard University did have prints of both of the films that disappeared. So when they announced they were going to show Vertigo and Rear Window, I was one of the, more than 100 people who crammed into a screening room to see the film. So that's really the first time that I had seen those films as an adult and could really, respond to them in some kind of mature way.
That's incredible. Is Vertigo or Rear Window one of your very favorite Hitchcock films?
Well, it's hard to know. I love Hitchcock in some ways. To me, is the exemplary 20th century filmmaker who spans the silent era into CinemaScope and color filmmaking. And I'm very fond of many of his films. As time has gone by, I've become quite enamored of a lot of the early black and white British films, which have their own distinct charms as opposed to, Rear Window and Vertigo and North by Northwest and Psycho, et cetera, et cetera. I think, in a way, the 50s are kind of the pinnacle of achievement, but I would be unhappy to be without many of the other films as well.
You mentioned Bergman, which is another absolute favorite of mine. Was Bergman instrumental in having an interest in philosophy?
That's an interesting question. I had never thought of that. Bergman, I think, struck me because growing up, I had a very observant and pious Lutheran mother, and I was dragged into Sunday school classes and was basically asked to take very seriously the question of whether God exists, and if so, what does it mean? And therefore, when I began to see Bergman films, I had been raised to understand in detail the kind of religious background he comes from and the kind of questions that he was tormented by, particularly in a film like, say, Winter Light,
yes.
Which is couldn't be more directly about whether God exists or is hidden, and what is there to believe in and why to believe, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, looking back, so many of the art films of the 50s, Fellini has a thread running through his early neo-realistic films that also has a pretty large religious element in it. So I'm struck in retrospect of how important those themes were, even though I would say at the time in the 60s, I was in full rebellion against religion and thought of myself as a skeptic and then an atheist. And so I would devour the films without quite fully understanding the religious subtext. So I think that actually a lot of the early appreciation of Almodovar similarly was, it wasn't attuned to the religious subtext in what he was doing, even though it's there from pretty early. Certainly by the third film, Dark Habits, it's quite explicit and florid.
I am really seeing the parallels now. Questions are getting answered why you love Almodovar. This is interesting. This is fantastic. With Bergman, did The Virgin Spring have quite an impact on you? Because that's one of his toughest watches.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't see it until later. My introduction to art film came, at the time I was living in Chicago, near the University of Chicago, and there was a theater in Hyde Park that did show art films. I think I saw, trying to remember, what is the first Bergman film? The Seventh Seal.
Yes.
And Miles of a Summer Night. I didn't see the films in chronological order when they were coming out. So I eventually saw The Virgin Spring, but I don't think I saw that until the early 70s when I was in a mode of trying to see every film made by certain filmmakers. And so it sort of blended in at that time. I recently watched it again because of the Criterion Blu-ray set of more or less the complete Bergman.
Mm-hmm.
And, it did not impact me until much later. And by the time I was watching Virgin Spring again, I'd already seen a lot of wild and crazy movies by Almodovar and a lot of other filmmakers that are much more graphic than that film.
Yes, but I commend you for watching The Virgin Spring twice. That is something that I don't know if I can do for a long time.
Well, as you get older, you do forget what you actually saw. So I was surprised at how graphic it was watching it again, frankly.
And Antonioni, Antonioni is someone that many people find boring, that his work is boring because there's so much silence and it's visual storytelling. Did you immediately become fond of, admire Antonioni?
Gosh. Well, I don't know. I went to art films and I expected not to understand what I was seeing. So I spent a certain amount of time when I was in high school and college deliberately seeking out works of art that mystified me. And I thought that was part of what it was to be a modern person. And, if I was supposed to read the works of Freud or Ulysses by James Joyce, I shouldn't expect movies to be transparent in their impact. So I would say that my first encounters with Antonioni were fairly jejune and naive. The easiest movie by far that hit me with immediacy was Blow Up. And because by then I was interested in rock and roll, I was part of the counterculture, and I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. Look, there's Jeff Beck, there's Jimmy Page, woohoo.
Yeah.
And then, Monica Vitti is easy on the eyes to watch. And I thought the anomie and the boredom was sort of part of what, the whole critique of modern civilization that art films, some of them were trying to present, and certainly Antonioni. I should add that I had the advantage or disadvantage of having lived for a year in Italy in 1958-59. My father was a Fulbright professor at the University of Naples, so I developed an interest in the popular culture of Italy and the high culture of Italy from firsthand acquaintance, which is a little peculiar for an American in the 50s to have had that experience. So I was interested in the Italian filmmakers for an additional idiosyncratic reason.
That's incredible to have had that experience, and especially of that time. All these films we're discussing are masterpieces. They're fantastic. And even you see Monica Vitti, she was incredible alongside Alain Delon in Leclise? Yeah, Leclise. Sometimes I get it confused with La Notte. But Alain Delon is also easy on the eyes, so great chemistry.
Yeah, no kidding. So a lot of eye candy in these art films.
Yes, definitely.
As Almodovar would certainly appreciate and did.
Yes, he did. And you talk about the counterculture, and again, like 60s and 70s were fantastic eras for film, and especially to grow up and to discover film at this time is extraordinary. In the 60s, especially the later part of the 60s, in the U.S., it was a transitional era as old Hollywood was fading out in censorship and new Hollywood was established. Since you also love music and have written and studied music, what did you think of Easy Rider?
Actually, I never liked Easy Rider. I saw it again about 5 years ago, and it really does nothing for me.
Huh.
I don't particularly like the music that's used. Dennis Hopper. There are other films of the era that impressed me more at the time, but for some reason, Easy Rider didn't do it. Now, part of this is because by then I was seeing on the screen it seemed to me almost a parody of the experiences I was having living at that time on the West Coast, and part of the whole world of drug, sex, and rock and roll in the 60s. I mean, for a time I had my own rock band. And
Oh, wow.
so, I'm of an age where I saw performers like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane. I saw all those bands live.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
in situ, often under altered states of consciousness. So there was a period where I was so deep into the counterculture as a set of experiences and experiments that I had a weird relationship to some of the representations of the counterculture. There's a really stupid film that Roger Corman made called The Trip that I think Dennis Hopper is in, that had
Stupid?
The Trip. Yeah, I find it stupid.
Oh, no. We were just discussing these incredible films, and now The Trip. You don't like The Trip?
No, I just found it very silly.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
Sorry. I mean, no,
It's an experience.
So there are Roger Corman films that I find, campy and enjoyable.
Of course,
but I'm just saying, at the time, it's just like, really? This is a film about that? Whereas, Blow Up, that affected me. I took that very seriously as a film, even though looking back, I had no... looking at it today, it strikes me as an incredibly confused film because Antonioni starts out with a script that's going to be very critical of the counterculture, in which a bunch of stoned people are going to ignore a murder, which is sort of morally bad. Mm-hmm. But then he falls in love with the counterculture. So you have this movie that's a love letter to swinging London with a script that's decrying how alienated all these stoned people are. But I saw it stoned, and I didn't see the critique, so what can I say? I'm not a reliable narrator on these years.
I see, but I respect your opinion. In the 70s, you wrote a review on Martin Scorsese's The Last Waltz for Rolling Stone magazine. The film has been regarded as one of the greatest concert films ever made. Was this review the first time you wrote about film?
Maybe. I don't even remember writing the review. I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
I've written so many reviews about so many things. I don't recall. I don't know. I mean, mainly it was an assignment, so I wrote about it. Subsequently, I did write about film and rock music in ways that I myself chose to write about when I wrote my book, Flowers in the Dustbin. Because I had an interest in film, and because film plays such an integral role in the global rise of rock and roll, it's really impossible to understand without the global distribution of a film like Blackboard Jungle, which created an audience for Rock Around the Clock as a song. And, there are many memoirs of people, including interviews with John Lennon, that, that's when they discover rock and roll. They're in a film theater. They're not listening to music on the radio. So, that was an important part of the rock and roll story. And, at the time, to take a movie that I think is very much of the moment and a counterculture movie that was clearly authentic is Don't Look Back, the Bob Dylan documentary, which it came out a couple of years after it was shot. And Dylan at that point was out of circulation. But, the mythic Dylan you see in that film, that was a very important, film element of the rock and roll counterculture of the 60s. Whereas The Last Waltz, I don't remember whether I liked it or disliked it. I mean, it's just a big concert film.
Yeah.
And, it has, I most recently looked at it again because it has the Staple Singers are in it. And I was writing liner notes for a Staple Singers reissue. And so it was great to see Mavis Staples, but, some of the performances was like, really? I mean, they're going to sing along with, the band and do a version of The Wait. I mean, I don't think all of the artifacts of the 60s have aged equally well.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's true. In your book, Democracy is in the Streets, From Port Huron to the Siege of Chicago, you talk about Tom Hayden, who was one of the leading figures during the trial of the Chicago 7, and just so happened to be, as frequent listeners know, I'm a fan of the Fonda family, the second husband of Jane Fonda. Aaron Sorkin wrote and directed the film The Trial of the Chicago 7 in 2020, which I found to be excellent, but was let down when I learned that the film departed from the real-life story in many ways. How do you feel about films that don't remain committed to telling the true story behind historical events?
Well, I mean, Aaron Sorkin,
Yes, he's fantastic, but...
I don't expect very much from films that are loosely based on reality. I cut them some slack. In the case of that film, I had a terrible disadvantage in that I had actually met and interviewed many of the people depicted.
Oh, wow.
And therefore I knew, in order to write my book, I spent time with Tom Hayden. I met Jane Fonda.
What?
I was in their
God.
house. So, I, as a historian and also as a journalist who had interviewed these people and met them on more than one occasion, I had a firsthand knowledge of the real people. And it's been a while since I thought about it, but, the Tom Hayden in the film is much less interesting than the actual Tom Hayden, who was an incredibly complicated character and had a certain pathos around him, I think. But, I'm trying to think of other examples of historical films. I mean, Warren Beatty's Red makes a very earnest effort to get the John Reed story straight. And I suppose it's a better film than the Chicago 7, but, I'm not sure. I don't know. I
really enjoyed Reds, even though I think you have to be fluent in politics a little bit more to understand and appreciate it. So I'm going to give it a rewatch at some point soon.
Well, yeah, you could also go read some books about Greenwich Village radicals in the 1920s, and then you would learn about Emma Goldberg and blah, blah, blah. So it is true that here I'll give you another example of historical film that makes no effort to be realistic, but The Leopard, Il Gattopardo, that film is in its original version. It's a great film. You can sort of immerse yourself in it, but if you know anything at all about the actual history of the Italian Risorgimento, it takes on a whole different cast. Mm-hmm. And the original film version makes no concessions to its audience that it's going to, fill in the blanks of that history, whereas the new TV version, is it Netflix? I forget.
I'm not sure.
It's pretty good, but it also goes out of its way so that, they basically give you the backstory, and it's easier to follow, but it has no poetry in the way that the film did. Mm. So the way that films interact with history, I think, is it's interesting and complicated, and films can function as records of historical events just because they happen to be set or be shot on location at a certain time and place. Mm-hmm. And, I get a kick out of watching noir films that show New York City in the early 50s or late 40s or LA, both cities I've lived in. And, you can just see a material reality that no longer exists. Mm-hmm. But it was almost accidentally captured because it was just happened to be shot on that location at that time.
The Leopard Visconti, that's with Alain Delon, right?
Yeah.
All right. It will be on my watch list.
And yeah, I sense that you're an Alain Delon fan. So
I am.
By all means, you must see the movie. Claudia Cardinale is in it too. And Burt Lancaster is masterful in the film.
Okay. I actually do have an Alain Delon related question later, but I need to know. So you said you met Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden. Can you talk about your experience meeting them?
Well, I interviewed Tom Hayden twice. Both times he was at their house in Santa Monica. The first time I don't think Jane was in the house, if I recall correctly, but I spent the entire afternoon with Tom Hayden in his study. They had actually a rather modest, although I'm sure it cost $1 million bungalow in Santa Monica, and he had an office out back. And I had come armed with, a lot of paperwork and questions to ask him. And in effect, at that moment, I knew more about his past than he remembered. And my job was to prompt him with showing him documents or recollecting for him things that he'd said or done in the past that he hadn't thought about in a long time. I then sent a draft of the book to everybody that I'd written about. And the only person in the book who's really a public person was Tom. And he wrote back, and he sent me back the manuscript with all kinds of questions marked up, and he was arguing with me in my draft manuscript. And he said, I want you to come and interview me again. There was a particular episode in the book he didn't want me to write about. He said that what I had said was untrue. I knew he was lying. And anyway, to make a long story short, I in fact flew back to Santa Monica before submitting a final draft of the book to talk to Tom Hayden again. This time, Jane was at home and in fact answered the door. And she was planning a party for Bishop Tutu from South Africa. That was going to be a Hollywood gala that evening. And it was clear she was quite irritated that Tom had invited this interloper in while she was frantically trying to get ready for her fabulous Hollywood dinner party.
Wow.
We did have an interaction at that point because, when we emerged from the second interview, she was sort of pissed that Tom wasn't helping, set out the, appetizers or something. I don't know. This is it's just real life,
Yes, yeah. They were married for a long time. This depicts seemingly a real marriage.
Yeah, and a complicated marriage. And
yes.
I saw her again when Tom did a book tour. He eventually wrote his own memoirs, partially because he was inspired by my book, he told me.
Wow.
So when his book came out, I went to the book party, which was over at the house of a Harvard law professor. And, Tom was a politician at that point. So there were many Massachusetts Democratic politicians that were in attendance and a bunch of Harvard people. But Jane was shooting a film in Connecticut, and she rolled in at about 7 in the evening. It was amusing to me to watch all the Harvard grandees immediately become starstruck when she appeared. Because she's one of those celebrities who, when you meet them in person, it's like they seem to have a halo and a sparkliness around them that's supernatural. Mm-hmm. So Jane Fonda had that both times I met her. And because I worked at Newsweek, I've interviewed celebrities before. Not every celebrity has that kind of aura. Yes. Jane Fonda did. And, Tom Hayden was kind of a schlub. So.
Well, that's an incredible story. Wow, that's incredibly cool. Do you get starstruck when you meet people like Jane Fonda or other celebrities that you've interviewed? I'm so curious who you've interviewed.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I interviewed Paul McCartney, I didn't. Okay. He left me kind of speechless, and to make it worse, he had a guitar in his hand, and he was himself, I think, a little nervous, and so he would occasionally just start singing out of the blue. This was on the occasion of the release of Tug of War, the first album that he did after the death of John Lennon. Uh-huh. And, I was one of a parade of journalists who was getting to interview him in New York on the occasion of the launch of the album. So, once it's a job, you do sort of fall into a pattern. But there are other times in which, these celebrities can, they pretend that they're important or something, and you become so cynical. It's like, why am I talking to this person?
Yeah.
That's the way I felt when I interviewed Boy George for a cover story for Newsweek about British rock and MTV in the 80s. He's just a big lug of a guy who was getting drunk and, kissing the drummer who was his boyfriend at the time, and was really deeply boring. But I had to get some color for my piece.
Right. Yes. I know you don't remember writing the Last Waltz review, but do you happen to remember if Martin Scorsese reacted to your review?
No. When you write a review, generally you don't know how people react unless they are angry at you and, write to you an angry note. And that doesn't happen very often.
Good, yeah.
To this day, I'm surprised occasionally to discover that something I wrote had an impact. I'll give you an example. I reviewed the second album of Jimi Hendrix, and it's a terrible review. I look back at it, and I don't know what I was thinking or what I was smoking. But, there it is in hard, cold print. And at one point, I referred to his Voodoo Blues or something like that. But apparently, rock criticism was a new thing then, and it was a favorable review. And so I've learned from subsequent books about Hendrix that he read the review and he was struck by the phrase, and so he went and composed Voodoo Child. So, come on, that's cool.
These stories are extraordinary. What a life you've lived. You've got a private concert by Paul McCartney.
Well, yeah. As I say, he was nervous. I look back at the interview and I have the transcript and I can tell he was really nervous. And I was asking him some fairly pointed questions. So, anyway, it's all online somewhere. It's all part of the digital record of our fabulous, strange, popular culture.
Yes, I tried to read your Last Waltz review, but you have to subscribe to Rolling Stone to read all your articles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's behind a paywall. For a while, it was out from a paywall. So, even I can't read it.
Oh, that's
probably just as well. Yeah. Somewhere I have boxes of the original journals. Anyway,
wow.
We're not talking about Pedro Almodovar.
I know. I was about to start asking you about Almodovar's work because I absolutely loved your book. I've read a quote by Quentin Tarantino. He said, "When people in America talk about the great writer, director, auteurs, they don't talk about Pedro Almodovar enough. For 30 years, he has dwarfed almost all of his American peers. Do you agree that Pedro Almodovar doesn't get the wide recognition he deserves in the U.S.?
I don't know how to respond. And this is for a simple reason. When I stopped writing for Newsweek, I spent 25 years of my life being a working critic and being very aware of what other critics were writing. And that included being aware of what other film critics were writing. I knew David Anson, the film critic at Newsweek at the time, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was younger, I avidly read film criticism. I followed closely everything Pauline Kael wrote and so on and so forth. But latterly, I was working on other projects. I really wasn't paying that much attention. I just knew that I thought he was the greatest auteur of his generation. And my wife agreed and perhaps was even more emphatic in sharing that view. So at a certain point, maybe 15 years ago, I acquired every single film he'd ever made, and I watched everything. And I kept up. So with every new film, I would always make sure to go see it. And there weren't that many filmmakers that I did that with. So Almodovar was one of them. In fact, he probably was the only one. As I indicate in my book, and some of the first readers of the book were puzzled by this, I have a similar regard for Steven Spielberg.
Yes.
So I have followed Spielberg's career. And I'm fascinated by, the serious films he chose to make, once he sort of graduated from, the early breakthrough hits. But, he's another remarkable auteur who has many of the characteristics of a real auteur.
Yes.
But as I say in my book, I actually think that Pedro Almodovar is, if you believe in auteur theory, and it is a theory concocted by French journalists and intellectuals, well, he fills all the boxes in a way that even somebody like Truffaut does not.
Yeah.
And so he comes after them, and he knows what it takes to be in complete control of his destiny. And as he says in one of his interviews, he probably has more control over his films than Martin Scorsese, who I think is probably the only other contemporary filmmaker American filmmaker you could compare properly to Almodovar in terms of the corpus of his works and the staying quality of the work, in my view.
Another filmmaker who, he's not American, but he's British, Christopher Nolan, does seem to have acquired that free reign with his studio after moving from Warner Brothers to Universal. Do you think, Almodovar has released his films through Sony Pictures releasing throughout most of his career, if not his entire career. And with his collaborators, you write that they do have free reign, but Almodovar always has the final say. And this kind of goes into what you wrote in the preface about your outline of the 5 principal threads of your narrative arc, with the first describing Almodovar as a complete auteur.
Right.
Was Almodovar given free reign with Sony Pictures releasing, which is another collaboration worth mentioning?
Well, his deal with Sony Pictures is first of all, that he has a very long-standing and very loyal business relationship with Sony Pictures and the executives of Sony Pictures. But they have nothing to do with the making of the films. That's completely controlled by Almodovar's production company, El Deseo, which is run by his younger brother, Augustin, and is based in Madrid. So the distribution deals that El Deseo makes, they're anchored by the deal he has with Sony. And Sony has figured out a way to market the movies in a way that makes money for them in North America. But El Deseo has entered into a variety of different deals with different distributors for different markets, certainly in Europe. But the production of the film is completely in-house in El Deseo. And last I checked, Almodovar has never made a movie that lost money.
Really?
So the way he has approached filmmaking is completely different from the way an awful lot of American filmmakers have approached filmmaking. And, careers have been squandered in Hollywood by people who threw away a lot of money on a film that nobody wanted to watch.
Right.
And so the history of Almodovar is one of somebody who is very on top of business and budget and shooting to a schedule and delivering a film on time and on budget. And in that sense, his work ethic is more like, one of maybe the B-list directors in Hollywood that sometimes gets touted, like Edgar Ulmer. So he's a thrifty fellow, and they've husbanded their resources and their profits very carefully. Pedro, I think, was quite upset to be named in the Panama Papers as one of the places where there was, offshore banking going on, and El Deseo was part of it.
Oh.
So I digress a bit here, but it is part of the story. And the fact that he has this kind of absolutely surreal imagination that's completely free in so many ways, conjoined with a total control freak approach to directing that some actors can't abide. I mean, the fact that he will insist on, when he's directing Spanish actors, what accents they use, what the phonetic intonations are. It's pretty wild stuff.
Yes, and the line readings, I was a little surprised to hear that he does that, because a lot of actors really do not like that. They can't stand it. And I recently read that one of his most, not successful muse, maybe. One of his greatest collaborators is Penelope Cruz, and she
Yeah.
continuously talks so highly of him in interviews and how much she loves his process and just working with him. But his original muse, Carmen Mara,
Yeah.
they had a falling out because of, I think, that very reason, his directing style.
Yeah. Well, I think he's Antonio Banderas. Also, they've had an in and out relationship because it's a pretty rigorous way of making films. But Penelope's very comfortable with it, and on the DVD of I think Broken Embraces, one of the extras is you can actually you can see Almodovar giving her line. They show that happening, and she repeats after him. It's very strange, but you know, she adores and trusts him, and so she works with him. And the quality of what you get on the screen speaks for itself. It's quite remarkable, the body of work they've done together. And I think on the whole, you know, people like Tilda Swinton, she knows what she's getting into, and she responds. And, you know, you can see the results in The Room Next Door as well as in The Human Voice.
What did you think of The Room Next Door? This is his first feature English language film, and he also, of course, made the short film Strange Way of Life with Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal, but Pedro wanted to wait until he understood a little bit more of the American culture before finally making an English language film. So what were your thoughts on The Room Next Door?
Well, you know, I had mixed thoughts. I thought it was kind of funny that the film purports to be an American film, but it clearly was mainly shot in Madrid in his comfort zone.
Oh.
So he does some exteriors in New York in places I know well, including, you know, places a few blocks away from where I live in the Village. So there were location shots in America, but most of the interiors set in New York are all done, those are all sound studios with completely fake New York backdrops and fake snow. It's kind of like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. There's a fake Madrid set. And The Room Next Door is redolent of. And then he chooses as a location, supposedly in western Massachusetts, which is a part of the country I know quite well. There is no way what he's showing on screen has anything whatsoever to do with western Massachusetts. There are trees that don't grow in western Massachusetts. That's because the whole thing was shot on location outside of Madrid, by 100 miles outside. And drop dead gorgeous high modernist house.
Yes, yes.
One is left to wonder at how these characters can afford to choose as a place of euthanasia such a beautiful, beautiful building, replete with just exactly the right, you know, Hopper print in the background that he's going to riff on. So I think almost all the extras in the film are Spanish, too. He doesn't even try to hide it. I thought it was quite funny, actually. So that when, you know, they take side trips out from the house, they're clearly they're encountering people at grocery stores and coffee shops that are Spanish speakers.
Yes, yeah. I believe it did win a big award at Cannes, and it has been critically acclaimed.
No, it won the award at Venice.
Venice, that's the one, right?
He's never won the big award at Cannes. And given that his whole life has been built around competing for film prize awards, there's a certain irony, I think. But finally, he won the big one at Venice, which is the oldest of the film festivals. So
right. Yes.
I think it was probably a career achievement award as much as anything else. I mean, I think it's a good film, but it's got its problems. And I know that people who, as fate would have it, I know two people who have been involved in euthanasia situations in the past 3 years. And both of those people, who each of them is a fan of Almodovar, but they hated this movie. They thought it was a cosmetic prettification of what it's actually like to help somebody kill themselves.
In the acknowledgments of your book, you talk about going to a film premiere. Did you go to the premiere for The Room Next Door?
It wasn't a premiere. I went to a screening. I was enabled with the help of Sony Classics and also the New York Film Center, New York, I don't even know what the proper name is, New York Center Film Society. I was able to go to screenings and press conferences for a couple of the Almodovar films, and I was able to go attend a couple of the film festivals, and mainly because it was COVID and they didn't have as much demand as usual, because I'm not really a working film critic and therefore I shouldn't have been there. But I said, I need to know what this is like for my book.
Right.
So I got help from a couple of film critic friends of mine, David Denby and David Anson, who intervened. And when they stopped giving me a press pass, I was still able to get into the screening of The Room Next Door. And so, yeah, I saw the screening of Parallel Mothers.
Oh, yes.
And so yes, I got there early and was able to be in the front row, and there's Penelope Cruz, and it's all very exciting.
Wow.
So, in part because she is actually quite short. She's like Jane Fonda. She films as a taller person than she is, in fact, because of the angularity of her features. But anyway, and, Almodovar loves these kinds of press conferences.
Yes.
He loves to, parade, as some people put it sarcastically, his chicas. But, Penelope Cruz, it's quite obvious, adores Pedro Almodovar. And Pedro Almodovar, it was quite obvious at the press conference, is jealous of Penelope Cruz because she has a family with Javier Bardem, and he's a lonely man. So there are things you learn when you go to press conferences and see people interact in the flesh. So that Pedro's jealousy of Penelope was, it was obvious in the moment. And, you would have to be there and be sort of have thought about it and then watch it actually unfold. It's just she says how much she likes working with him, and he says how jealous he is that she has a family. And then the moment's over. But that's kind of an odd thing to say at a press conference.
It is. And it's kind of answering a question I've had for a while. He's only worked with Javier Bardem once, and that was in the 90s before they were married. And I wonder if that is playing in part of, his jealousy here.
Well, there's I'm pretty sure there's an interview somewhere where he talks about being in love with Penelope, shooting Bulwer. It's pretty, he loves her as a muse, and he's pretty straightforward about it.
Yes.
But I guess, in terms of her marriage to Javier, since, Pedro's gay, it doesn't matter, right?
Well, yeah, I was thinking he's been in a long-standing relationship, right?
Yeah, but it's not like Hitchcock and the creepiness of him and Kim Novak or Tippi Hedren, and that's just sick. So here you have a super genius who's seriously sadistic in certain ways. With all those birds attacking poor Tippi. Anyway, I digress.
No, but you make an interesting comparison because I don't think he treated Grace Kelly that way. So it seems like Penelope Cruz is his Grace Kelly.
I guess. But honestly, I don't know. And I'm not sure I want to know about, Alfred Hitchcock's erotic dream life. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, speaking of Hitchcock, he's one of Almodovar's biggest influences and one of his favorite filmmakers. Which of his films would you say is his most Hitchcockian?
I'm not sure there's any single one of them that's Hitchcockian. It's not like Brian De Palma, where you're like, gosh, he's going to remake Psycho or something. It's not like that at all. Or is it Cronenberg? I forget. So all of the films have Hitchcockian moments, but in the very first film, there's a moment that is a more or less direct quote out of Rear Window, and it's kind of funny because this is, a do-it-yourself small-budget film with a handheld 16-millimeter camera, and yet he's trying to do a zoom shot and voyeurism, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I actually think there probably is the specific reference in Broken Embraces to Peeping Tom
Mm-hmm.
is more explicit than any reference to Hitchcock that I can think of in Almodovar's films. The Hitchcock influence is so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and yet you can't pin it down in the kind of homage, which you can do with the Michael Powell allusion to Peeping Tom and Broken Embraces.
Right. I agree because I found that even when you described Broken Embraces as a noir in the book, you understand that he's taking influence, but it's so much of his own style that it's not ever so clear. And someone I read online regarded Broken Embraces as his most Hitchcockian, but I felt like one of the plots, Penelope Cruz's character's plot in Voltaire, was the most Hitchcockian, and the sister, Soul's plot about finding her mother appearing, was very Bergman, very Fanny and Alexander.
Yeah, well, you could say that, and it's true that in Voltaire there's the frozen corpse, and he's trying to get rid of a corpse. It obviously refers to The Trouble with Harry, the Hitchcock comedy of one of his lesser films of the 50s. But still, there aren't that many films about having trouble getting rid of a corpse. So.
No. And Hitchcock does it really very well to make it one of his staples.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Pepe Lucy Bomb, and the homage to Rear Window really begins that film. But the film also starts, he starts off strong. He portrays a rape, and the film is regarded as a black comedy, dark comedy. I've only seen the film once, but I didn't quite recognize the comedy from a first watch. Did you immediately recognize and laugh at the dark comedy?
Well, yeah, because, it's superficially the movie it's a riff on John Waters and Pink Flamingos.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of zany screwball comedy element to it. But at the same time, there's a lot of very tough footage that, as I try to explain in the book, it seems to me reveals his equal debt to Andy Warhol and the kind of cinema verite that Warhol was doing at the factory. Many of those films, some of them are quite short, they're kind of hard to watch because, Warhol is essentially putting on parade deeply damaged human beings who are behaving badly. So, one of the films of Warhol that I guess is probably more widely seen than some others because it shows the Velvet Underground during their heyday. But it's a very disturbing film because you see the singer Nico, who has a small child who she's neglecting. Well, she's obviously high on smack and fooling around with the band. So there's this kind of abandoned child that the footage is capturing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are similar scenes that get captured in the course of Pepe Lucy Bomb because it's shot on location in places where the movida was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, real people behaving badly. And it's all thrown up on the screen. Some of the other stuff is clearly staged just to be outrageous, but some of what he's showing is what really was happening at the time. So it's a film like Blow Up, I think, that is a little bit working at cross purposes with itself because it's partially a gimlet-eyed document of a moment in time, and yet it's also meant to be a ha-ha, this is funny, everything's in quotes, screwball comedy. And the camera's capturing more than the ha-ha suggests, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yes. And as you said before, he's able to portray some really dark subject matters in a way that not any other filmmaker really can portray. This is not an easy thing to do, but somehow he manages it seamlessly.
Well, he manages seamlessly until he doesn't. I think actually there's a moment in his career, which I don't really talk about, where, he sort of decides that he's going to make screwball comedies after he has his breakthrough international art film hit with Women on the Verge.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of the films he makes afterward, like Kiki or Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, yeah, they're a little bit icky in terms of their, showing, in the case of Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, you basically have a stalker and a rape, and then it turns out to be a happy ending. And, he leans into this theme, I think, with a kind of obsessiveness that betrays the fact that he's kind of stuck.
Mm.
So my own view is that he really only becomes unstuck when he can finally make a film that's autobiographical about why is it he's so obsessed with rape.
Yeah.
And that film is Bad Education.
Right.
But the film that sets up Bad Education is Talk to Her, which I don't write about in the book, which is a film really about in which he's able finally to present a rape that is magically providential. And we're completely sympathetic with the rapist because it seems we're made to feel very, very sorry that the guy is arrested and commits suicide in prison. So he somehow manages in that film to take the theme of rape and make it not a joke, but make it into something that's deeply perplexing and mysterious and enigmatic. And once he's made that film, then he can make Bad Education and talk about his own history of sexual molestation at the hands of priests.
Right. You mentioned, Talk to Her. Another film that you didn't talk about was All About My Mother, which some say one of his best, if not his best film, even though it's very much up to debate. There's no clear favorite of his films. When you were talking about writing this book, did people find it surprising that you weren't focusing a chapter on All About My Mother?
No, because I explained at the outset what I was doing. I had to feel my way into the book. I wanted to write about Almodovar making films in which he was trying to transform himself as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I was primarily interested in not all of the films, but a handful of films. And I decided that my principle of selection was going to be films that had autobiographical content. And it turned out that all of them, after Voltaire, involve films about a filmmaker. They're all meta films in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So once I'd chosen that as the principle of selection, that's not the case with Talk to Her, All About My Mother, both of which are marvelous films
mm-hmm.
in quite different ways. I love Dark Habits as a film, and I didn't write about that because, again, it does have autobiographical elements, as almost all of his films have these elements scattered around. But I wanted to focus on movies where I thought it was quite clear from his interviews and his comments about how he'd made the films that he had a larger project going on in his approach to filmmaking, where he was episodically and from time to time making films in which he was trying to understand who he was and what would become of him. He's someone who, from Pain and Glory on, Pain and Glory is the most recent of his films I discuss explicitly and at length,
mm-hmm.
he's obsessed with his own death and his own mortality. So The Room Next Door is an entry it's a way of approaching something that obviously is preoccupying him. And where he goes from there, I have no clue. I think it's unclear to him where he goes because he's been doing these short films almost as intermezzos between trying to figure out what the next big project is. So there's a sense in which, as far as my book is concerned, if he had stopped making movies after Pain and Glory, then my book would have a perfect ending. But of course, he's still alive and he's still making movies, and they're still pretty gosh darn good.
They're really good. Parallel Mothers was excellent.
Yep, I agree. So we'll see. I think he's a highly unusual genius. of a sort that you rarely encounter in any art form. And, in many ways, how they've come to be who they are with the kind of capacities they have to tell stories in the ways that they do, it's mysterious and enigmatic. I don't like to throw around the word genius recklessly, but by genius, I mean it's inexplicable. I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. I tried to give an account that makes plausible how he could do this, but he's a genuine autodidact, and usually autodidacts are boring. But he learned on the job, and he didn't go to film school.
Nope.
Neither did Steven Spielberg.
Neither did Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. So
Almodovar's, like you mentioned, he's very aware of time, like Scorsese has said. They're very aware of the limitation of time and the amount of films they can make. I have other questions about his films, but this kind of goes into a question that I have about how his films are increasingly personal. In the book, you write that Pain and Glory is arguably his most autobiographical film. After Pain and Glory, Almodovar made the 2021 film Parallel Mothers, which marked the first time he covered Franco's reign in one of his films. But he did it from a retrospective point of view and separate from his personal experience, as the film is set in present day. Do you think, as his work becomes increasingly personal, that he may one day tackle Franco's reign head-on in a similar way he finally did with Addiction and Pain and Glory many years after films like Law of Desire?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think that the great films that have been made about the Franco era, one of them was actually produced by El Deseo and by Pedro and Agustin Almodovar. And it is, I'm going to have a senior moment and block on the name. It's the Mexican director who did, it's The Devil's Backbone, I think.
Okay.
That's an El Deseo production. The idea, Almodovar in the 80s had no interest in thinking about Franco. He said that very clearly at the time. He becomes more and more serious as time goes on. His filmmaking takes a turn towards the tragic. He becomes more adroit at handling ambivalence and mixed emotions on film. Mm-hmm. And so I don't... I think all of his films have personal elements, and they just become more and more, frankly, autobiographical up to Pain and Glory. So the films that follow, though, they're not particularly autobiographical. The Human Voice is an obsession of his, the Cocteau play, and which I talk about a little bit in the book. So when he makes that short film during COVID, that sort of scratches that itch of his, but it's not. It's about Cocteau, and it's about somehow the desperateness of unrequited love. That's the theme that interests him. And Parallel Mothers, on some level, I think it's not just about Franco, but ultimately, I think it's a movie about what it means to tell the truth and to be a truthful person, because it has a central character who is deeply committed to telling the truth about what happened under the Franco regime. But that same character is in an intimate relationship with another person that is fabricated out of lies and deceit. And the film's resolution can only come when the Penelope Cruz character is able to tell the truth to her intimate partner about the child she's rearing as if it were her own, knowing in fact it's not.
Yes, and even Penelope described filming that it was really emotional for her. She really would be crying. She said she'd be on the floor between takes doing the scene over and over. And talking about how torn her character was on whether or not to tell Anna that she discovered their babies were switched.
Yeah.
In Volver, Regina really doesn't want to know what Raimunda got her involved in when digging a grave. Do you think ignorance is bliss?
Do I think ignorance is bliss?
It's a question you pose towards the end of the book about truth, about Parallel Mothers. So I'm curious.
Um, yeah, in some circumstances, ignorance is bliss. I'm sure in some circumstances, I have not told people truthfully what I thought because I thought it would harm them and hurt them, and I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Nietzsche has written extensively about the value of ignorance and forgetting and amnesia.
Mm.
But as a historian, as someone interested in philosophy, I have an overriding commitment to truthfulness. And frankly, I think Pedro Almodovar does too.
Yes.
I mean, one of the ways he feels his way into thinking through who he is in truth is through fiction. So it becomes a complicated process for him. But, there have been other artists and philosophers who have pursued a similar path with similar stakes, trying to understand what kind of contribution they could make to the world and what their deepest gifts were.
In discussing bad education, you write that Juan was modeled after Alain Delon's famous portrayal of Tom Ripley in Purple Noon. Almodovar continuously portrays the complexity of human beings as not just good or evil, but you describe Juan as being a rare character in Almodovar's films. Could you explain what sets him apart from the more evil characters in other Almodovar films?
Well, I think most of the characters in Almodovar films, there are very few that are completely bad.
Yeah.
And Talk to Her is a good example where you see characters that are very mixed. And even in what I think are some of the less successful films that are meant to be screwball comedies about rape, the characters are shown as being who conduct rapes, as having, they're sympathetic in various ways because they're flawed. And he films them in such a way that viewers are invited to feel sympathy for characters, even though the conduct that they're shown doing is bad or evil. And this is true, for example, in Voltaire, where the hiding of the corpse, which is, conventionally sort of an immoral thing to be doing. You're not telling the police, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. All of our sympathies are directed towards Penelope Cruz's character, who's concealing the corpse and trying to get away and protecting her daughter from having to face questions about how her husband died, mm-hmm. And stepfather. But the character that is played in Bad Education, Juan, is because it's modeled explicitly on the Ripley character of Patricia Highsmith, and there's nothing sympathetic particularly about him. And Gael Garcia Bernal also was put into a very painful position as an actor in that film. And I think there's a lot of physical pain that's captured by Almodovar. Mm-hmm. And, there's a case where it's completely understandable to me that why Bernal would never, ever want to work with him again. I mean, mm-hmm. He forces him to play a transvestite. He forces him to dress as a woman. And I don't see what the redeeming characteristics are of that particular character.
Yeah, that was going to be another question I had, if there are any redeeming qualities. And, I mean, he says that when he's orchestrating the murder, do you not think that I'm hurt by this? And I don't know about you, but I don't know. Does he feel bad that he's killing his brother? Does that register with him? Does he have a heart there? I don't know.
Well, no, he seems to me to be, he's a character that seems to me to be without a conscience. And that's a rarity in Almodovar films. It's cold, heartless killers are a staple of action genre movies for sure, but they're very rare in Almodovar. I think, he has a keen awareness of how thin the line is between love and hate and good and evil.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But that particular character, I haven't thought about it since I wrote about it in the book, but why is it that he needs this character to be able to finally put on the screen what's been bugging him, so to speak, about his experience at the hands of the Salesian priest? There was something about how incredibly convoluted that film script is that was necessary for him to finally put down and put out with clarity and power what really happened. And to me, one of the peculiar features of that kind of confessional aspect of the film is that I think it's probably most powerful when it's not showing any kind of physical violation. It's the scene in which the favorite of the priest, who's the alter ego of the young Almodovar, is forced to sing a kind of salacious rewriting of the lyrics of Return to Sorrento for the priest. Mm-hmm. And you see them ogling him with lust. And it's a very, very, violating moment. Yeah. And it's all done through the gaze. There's nobody touches anybody.
Yeah.
It's really creepy.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very sinister character, and especially even reading the credits, how he kills off his love interest, I guess, who was Manolo, and it just through a car accident, and he managed to have incredible success as an actor, but remained terrible.
Well, but in Bad Education, the predatory priest ends up being a sympathetic character because Manolo comes to terms with the fact that he's attracted to young men. Mm-hmm. And so, a character we might expect to be simply a monster, an incarnation of radical evil, is nothing of the sort.
Yeah.
It's Juan, the imposter, who is the embodiment of radical evil in the film, not the predatory priest. So it's kind of the world turned upside down. And I find the film sort of endlessly amazing in the hoops it gets Almodovar jumping through.
Yes.
Because of how complicated the nested stories are. It's the one part of the book I was revising till the very end because it's so complicated. I thought in my first, the version that was set into print initially, I still haven't gotten it quite right. Oh. How complicated it is. I had to, anyway, I probably still don't have it right, but who knows?
I mean, speaking of complexity, I'm thinking of the scene in Law of Desire towards the end with the last hour between Pablo and Antonio. That's a absolute complexity of emotions and feelings towards one another.
No, there are a lot of examples of this in the films. And, Almodovar is one of those filmmakers that the more I watch the films, the more I adore them. The complexity, and it's an emotional complexity. It's not just a formal film cinematography complexity. Right. And there aren't that many filmmakers that their films repay that kind of rewatching. And, the greatest of the greats, yes. To me, Pedro Almodovar is one of the greats. So.
Absolutely. Towards the end of Pain and Glory, we watch young Salvador experience, as Almodovar describes, this portrayal beautifully as his first desire, which is not often depicted in cinema. When I watched the scene with fresh eyes, I cried because we are seeing a child's innocence, which is something that many believe is crucial in preserving, lost before our very eyes. How did you read the scene, and what feelings did it provoke for you?
Well, when I first saw the film, I was, it's a very moving scene. I write about how it's orchestrated to a recording by the Italian pop singer Mina. Mm-hmm. That's a very beautiful piece of pop music recorded in 1961. And I happen to have, independently of my love of Almodovar, a complete obsession with the career of Mina, the singer. She's still alive, 83 years old or something.
Oh, wow.
But at the same time, I was aware that this scene is a complete fiction that has no analog in Almodovar's life. He said so in the interviews at the time, but by the time I was watching it, I also knew, wow, this is a very different story than what we see in Bad Education.
Yeah.
Because the way that Almodovar was actually introduced to same-sex desire was through the predations of a priest.
Right. Yes.
So, in effect, Pain and Glory the director gets to give himself a happy origin story.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It is.
It's like it's an innocent revelation, and it all sort of has a happy ending. And in that sense, it wouldn't surprise me if Almodovar never makes another autobiographical movie, or at least one as autobiographical as the ones I wrote about in my book, because Pain and Glory, he gets to tell the story, and he gives it a kind of closure, I think.
Yeah, he does.
And by retelling it with this kind of essentially innocent birth of same-sex desire, he uses his own artistry to give an alternative, to present an alternative reality that is consoling rather than disquieting.
Oh, I have so many more questions that I could pose to you, but we have been talking about your book, The Passion of Pedro Almodovar, a Self-Portrait in 7 Films. Congratulations on another outstanding book. Even though, again, we've been talking about his work, what is your book about?
Well, I wrote my book in part because I saw in Pedro Almodovar's career someone wrestling with having lived through the experiences of the counterculture of the 60s and having tasted their excesses and having been unable to get over it, yet knowing that in some ways what happened was a dead end that it's not clear could ever be repeated or should be repeated. So I generally write books about topics that concern me personally and intimately, and that's true of this book as well.
It was an excellent book. I had been a fan of Almodovar before, but only had seen 3 films, but now I credit you for cementing my love for Almodovar, and I continue to want to tell people about his work, and I've already started to, because I do feel like he's very much underrated, and many of my filmmaker friends aren't so familiar with his work. So your book was fantastic, and I absolutely loved going through chapter by chapter, watching the film, reading the book, and I'm sure this book will impact so many.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words, and I'm so happy that I could write something that could mean something to a reader like yourself. Thank you.
And your book will be available through Amazon, and what other outlets will the book be available?
Well, if the Columbia Press is doing its job, it'll be in bookstores near you.
All right.
But no, it's it is being distributed. It's being published at the end of April to coincide with the Lincoln Film Center award of their Lifetime Achievement Award to Pedro Almodovar.
Ah, wow.
So, Pedro has lived a life in which he's been lucky enough to be acknowledged for what he truly is, a grand master. We should all be so lucky.
Yes, yes. And you actually were able to get a few questions answered by him. And as you said, it seems like you saw him in person. So, I mean, that's incredible and very cool. But do you think he'll read your book?
Yeah, I think he reads a lot. So, I have no evidence he's read it yet. I was surprised that he was willing to answer email questions. But no, I mean, he's a filmmaker that's acutely self-conscious of how he's interpreted and understood, and he's gone out of his way to facilitate interactions with film scholars. So, someday, some way, I expect he'll read it. Whether I know what he thinks about it is a whole other question.
Sure. And you'll be celebrating the book's release on Pub Day by giving a reading at the New School of the book, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a couple public events in New York, and one is a screening of Bad Education, and then a Q&A with people in the audience about what they've seen. And then at the end of April 29th, I think, precisely, publication date, I'll do a reading from the book and then do a Q&A with Robert Polito, a colleague of mine who has also written books about film. He's a poet, a nonfiction writer, and a critic.
Huh.
So that'll be it.
And is it true that you'll be writing a second book on Almodovar expected to be released late next year?
Ha, ha, ha. No.
Oh, thought I saw something online about that.
No, that's not true.
Huh, okay.
Well, you can send me the link and I'll try to figure out,
Yeah, I'll send you.
It's true that Columbia wanted me to potentially update the book as a paperback, but it's not even clear there will be a paperback. Increasingly, hardbound books are the only game in town, but that's a whole other conversation about the changing nature of the book business.
Right.
But anyway, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for taking the time to read and then to interview me.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming on. I have greatly enjoyed this opportunity to read your book early and go through it and discuss cinema with you, and specifically Almodovar's work at length with you. And you've made me a bigger Almodovar fan, and I can't wait to go through more of his films and continue to analyze and discuss them with more people, spread the word about his excellent artistry.
Great. So,
The Passion of Pedro Almodovar. Oh, sorry.
I say, are we done? But you can wrap it up.
Yes, I was going to wrap it up real quick. The Passion of Pedro Almodovar will be released on April 29th, but is available to be pre-ordered now at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, really wherever books are sold. And I'll be sure to remind you all through the All the Film Things Instagram to purchase the book on Pub Day. Is there a film recommendation, a line from a film, really anything you'd like to conclude our episode with today?
A film recommendation?
Yeah, a film recommendation, a line from a film, really anything, if anything film related or anything that you want to conclude our episode with?
No. No. Is this something that you do routinely, and therefore I'll ruin your format if I don't give you an answer?
You wouldn't ruin
give you an answer.
It is something I continuously ask. It's part of the end of an episode, but some people don't answer it, so it's okay if you don't have an answer.
Well, no. I mean, I can tell you the next film I'm going to watch is Antonioni's Eclipse.
Ah, yes.
Because it includes footage of Mina, my favorite Italian pop actress. She sings in that film.
Ah, okay.
So there's more than one reason why Almodovar, I think, toyed with the idea of doing a biopic of Mina. Right,
yes.
Which is, to me, still to this day, a very strange idea. Mm-hmm. Although she does predate Bob Dylan and David Bowie in her chameleon-esque qualities. Mm-hmm. So she's a pioneer, a postmodernist pioneer.
Yes. And it's especially interesting since Pedro has said that he's not a big fan of biopics. So very interesting.
Yeah, I know. But I did my research. I found it in the trade. There's the Hollywood Reporter, reports on it. So it was a thing for a while.
Yes.
Anyway. Okay. Well, have a good day.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm going to close out. I would recommend everyone dive into the work of Pedro Almodovar through your book. Do what I did and watch each film before reading the chapter about the film, and you will come away admiring Almodovar with a new found passion for cinema. And I truly believe filmmakers watching and studying his work will better their craft. Thank you again so much for joining me today, Jim. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you for having me.
And I would like to conclude our episode with the same quote Pedro Almodovar ended with an interview he gave in 1985, which is available through the Criterion Channel. I hope you all sleep very well and that tomorrow brings us all a day full of peace, pleasure, and safety, and happiness too. Bye, everyone. Special thanks to James Miller, Max Alvarez, Dr. Gillian Smith, Sarah C. Noel, Caitlin Fitzpatrick, Joshua Smith, and Sophia Schroeder. This episode was recorded on April 3rd, 2025.